The New Orleans Saints, in a move surprising to many, released special teams ace JT Gray yesterday. We're going to talk about that as well as some other roster additions. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. In the opening, I said the Saints released JT Gray in a move surprising to some. Sort of surprising to me in the sense of when it was done, because initially, and I mentioned this in a couple videos when we were kind of getting down to the 53-man roster, and then on cut date when on that video, that especially with him being injured most of the preseason, that roster spot for him might have been in a little bit of question. And part of it is some of the stuff that we're going to talk about a little later on. But for the most part, once he made the 53, I put all the questions I had of why he may not make it to bed, going, okay, he's 100% healthy. They're ready to go with him. He's going to handle the special team stuff, be the team leader that he has been, being almost assuredly was going to be special teams team captain yet again. Going, okay, that's all taken care of. And at that point, I forgot about it. And thinking, nah, it's locked down. If there was any chance they were going to move on, they were going to do it before then. Now, when you're talking about JT Gray, I think most Saints fans are familiar with him, but I think this has to be acknowledged because I think we owe, at least I know I do, a big thank you to JT Gray for what he has done for the Saints. Because he was a first team All Pro as a special teamer in 2021, second team in 2019 and 2024. He made a Pro Bowl in 2021. He was originally an undrafted free agent in 2018 out of Mississippi State, showed up that rookie year and made his mark on special teams. And the thing is, back then, that's the height basically of the Saints, because God knows in 2018 we should have went to the Super Bowl, won the damn thing, but I digress. But that was the height of the Saints' kind of second golden age under Sean Payton and Drew Brees. It was the last one, but that roster was so good, top to bottom. The starters were fantastic. It was just a well built, well constructed roster, and so you had the space to go look. And I don't think there was any position where if somebody went down, we were really worried about it. Going, yeah, the guy that's going to come up may not be as good as a starter and probably isn't, but he's going to be plenty good enough. And the top end of our roster was so good, it wasn't that much of a stretch to realize a couple of the other starters, and it didn't matter which side of the ball you were talking about, a couple of the starters can cover that. So you really weren't worried about a JT Gray going, what if he has to play some safety? It really wasn't going to happen. You didn't need a lot of people to go down to get to that point where you were concerned. When you have a roster built like that, adding that basically as your 53rd man to handle that stuff is fantastic because now you're even better. He's making you better in the third phase of the game where you're already pretty damn good in the offense and the defensive side of it. And what he did 2018, 2019, 2020, those are the last 3 years we had a playoff run, stabilizing that special teams. There was no point when he was out there. And in the subsequent years, as the roster started to deteriorate, there's no point where, at least for me, I was ever worried where we were going to have a problem covering a punt or a kick. JT alone was going to pretty much take care of that. And the rest of our special teams are good enough if they did, which a lot of teams did do, is look, make sure you take care of that gray guy. Somebody else was going to come in and for the most part, fill the shoes, right? So that is not an easy job. It's sometimes a thankless job. And that's one of the things I do like about the New Orleans media and the New Orleans fans. We knew, oh no, it's an important job. He does it very, very well. One of the best in the NFL. We have him. And especially the last few years when we were worried about our offense and defense, it was just kind of nice to go, well, at least we don't have to worry about freaking covering punts and kicks. JT's got it. We had some younger players starting to step up with him going, oddly enough, special teams, or sadly enough, probably, special teams was the best phase we had in football last year in 2024. So losing him is a big deal. And I appreciate the whole time he was here because being a pure core special teamers, quite honestly, it's most of the time in the NFL a thankless, dirty work job that some players they don't even want to do. And it can be a tough job. So, you know, the ones that go out and do it well, do it great. He was a great one, or he is a great one, actually. He's not retired. He's just no longer in a team. But thank you for the effort. Thank you for everything you did. And being, like I said, that key piece when he first showed up in 2018, those last 3 years of a playoff run that the Saints had. So we'll get into a little more of why I think it happened and et cetera. But for the most part, to me, the most important thing was giving him the thank you, giving him the acknowledgement that I think all Saints fans give him. Am I a little disappointed? Absolutely, and probably a lot disappointed. Um, do I understand it? We'll get into that in a second. In a weird way, I do, but in a weird way, I'm still not sure if it was the right move. But we'll talk about that now. Now, the reason why I said I was concerned before the initial 53-man roster was set about Gray was, that injury playing into it a little bit. But unlike 2018 to 2020, this roster is still, I'm not going to use past tense, it's currently in a state of we've got issues we have to deal with, whether it's injury, still some depth issue at some spots, some worse than others. And you're kind of looking at it and going, can we afford a core special teamer? Do we need that spot for some other purpose, some other reason? And I had some question marks about that. And to me, like I said, the biggest surprise was it happening a week after that 53. I would have thought that decision would have been made before that. Now, however, one thing that I forgot, and I don't think anybody's really mentioned yesterday, although somebody somewhere may have, but last week when the 53 was announced and some of the media stuff available after that, Kellen Moore said a couple of times that the roster is a work in process, talking about not only the 53 man, but the practice squad. They had some spots open that we've went ahead and finally filled yesterday. And even in the last video, talked a little bit about how they were targeting specific, felt like players for specific reasons off of certain teams for a reason, and how that kind of played into it. One of the things that when I was trying to construct the best I could of 53 man, what made it very difficult is how many we are keeping at certain positions. And even beyond that is having some injuries that they're not thinking were long term, but they don't know if they were going to have guys back week one. Yesterday, when Kellen Moore was speaking to the media, he indicated some may return, didn't say who or how many, so we don't really know. It could very well just depend on how they or if they're able to practice this week. So leaving some spots on the practice squad to bring some guys in or to make some moves because you can basically release a veteran and immediately sign him to the practice squad. The younger players that don't have the time in the NFL, they've got to clear waivers, and it's a totally different story in regards to that. Going, Jack Stoll comes to mind. I kind of feel like he has to be on the 53 game day, but right now he's kind of hanging out on the practice squad because they could put him there and full well knowing he's going to be back up. But when you looked at, to me, one of the spots that kept popping in my head is Fawaga and Penning seem to be, they think, ready to go week one, but we don't know for sure. But they did not put them on the IR or the pup list. So, which tells you, even if they're not quite ready for week one, you figure they'll be ready shortly thereafter. So you might have to just skate through 1 week carrying an extra offensive lineman or two you wouldn't normally want to, just may be forced to because we're not really sure. And we don't have the solid depth there that we thought we were going to have. The Landon Young season ending injury really put a big blow on that. Say the same thing about defensive back because Alante Taylor, we're not sure. Now, Ugo Madi's done a good job of filling in the star, but this kind of goes back to that might have been the spot where they're thinking, and that I'm interested to see what Taylor does this week and what comes out about him, where they're thinking Taylor can't play. We keep Gray. We're technically short two DBs in a weird sort of way. If something happens, we may be putting Gray out there to play defense at safety. I have mentioned this before, and I will say it again. I have been in the dome in the last couple of seasons where similar things have happened. JT Gray is suddenly back there playing free safety, and let me tell you, it raises the especially last year, as bad as our defense was, pucker factor for me got really tight going, man, if I'm the offense, I'm throwing over the top right at wherever he's lined up. And we're just going to see. When you're not in the position we were in that 2018 to 2020, you may, like right now, you may keep finding yourself in that position. And part of it is got to kind of develop some of those younger guys to handle that, So I understand. I don't know if I agree with it, but I understand some of their thinking. And then there was something else that Scott Shanley tweeted, that he's saying yesterday in a tweet, harsh reality of the recent rule changes on kickoff. If you can have a starter run 20 yards, you don't need special teams. It's getting harder to make teams unless see as possible starter have a role on O or D. Not a lot of teams keeping guys to cover punt and punt returns anymore. Um, I can't. There's no empirical way I could agree or disagree with that totally. But I think this, in a weird sort of way, kind of ties into what we're talking about here. Going in, like I've already had a comment about JT Gray going to Denver, and I'm like, yeah, I think it's a 99.99% possibility that's where he's going to be. And as of I'm filming this Tuesday morning, that he hasn't signed is actually with Denver is kind of surprising me, but I expect it to happen any minute. And it makes sense for a team like Denver, playoff team last year. That is a really good roster, looks to be really, really deep. And you can go, you know what? We don't need that extra spot necessarily for an extra offensive lineman because we have injuries up there, or an extra this, or an extra cornerback, or whatever any of those problems existed. We're fine with the depth we have. If somebody goes down, we can fill the spot. Let's bring in an all-pro special teams ace and go, well, we're definitely gonna shore up that spot. We're not gonna give up bad field position because we can't cover upon our kick. So I think partly Shanley may be onto something here, and it's probably a select bunch of teams, but where every team for a while was basically carrying their special teams ace, I, I don't know if you get into some roster issues like the Saints have, where you're going, no, we just may have to have that spot held for somebody else. I'll also say this: what I think Shanley kind of missed the boat on this is the preseason has shown they tweaked some rules on kickoff returns, and I think that's really maybe the more important part of the punt than a punt return or covering a punt. Is it looks like you're starting to get kickoff returns more, and that was why they kind of changed some of the rules. And in preseason, and you saw it a couple times in games the Saints played. All of a sudden, decent kickoff return, and now starting field position for the offense is other side of the 35, 40, approaching midfield. We had one, I think it was a Denver game, but it might have been the Jacksonville game, where we kicked off and we had a big return like that. And that's when JT Gray was missing time because of a hamstring injury. And their offense was starting right around their own 40. I had the thought going, yeah, this is where you need JT Gray. So ultimately, I would like the roster to have been firm where you could say, we may or may not be a playoff team this year, but let's keep JT around because we feel like, and I'm hoping this is the worst case scenario, we will be in 2026. We don't want to expose them to anybody else, any other team like a Denver with a going, yeah, we don't mind burning that last 53 spot on him. He's going to help us, where we need help, special teams. We've got everything else covered. So I'm really mixed on this one, but honestly, I mean, if you've seen the videos, I had some concerns that kind of roll along this point. As far as that open spot and who takes them, like I said, if there are concerns about the offensive line and a couple of our starters may be up in the air for week one, we may be taking an extra spot there. Defensive line had a couple of guys that were missing some time, but I don't think anything was really off there. Um, as far as injury that we know of, nothing really reported. Might have just because you got some veterans there, and some of those last practices after the last preseason game might have just been, give them a rest. I know they were wanting to rest players coming into this week where they're going to pick things back up for the Cardinals. So tight end could be one where they're, like Stoll bringing it back and trying to keep four on the active roster. So there's always those possibilities, and they were trying to figure it out, and they just couldn't make it work. And ultimately, it was like, we've got to take that spot from Gray. And I feel like that might have been what happened. Now, there is one guy floating around. And way back a couple of weeks ago when we were doing preseason, I talked about him a little bit. Quite honestly, I forgot about him until Ross Jackson. I was watching Matt Moscona's show yesterday afternoon, radio show, and he had Ross on, and Ross brought this up when they were, because this has just happened a few hours before when Gray was cut. He brought up the name Terrell Burgess, and I went, forgot about him, that he had been released and then brought back to the practice squad, and he was sitting there. And Ross Jackson brought up the fact that he was drafted by the Rams in 2020. He was a third-round pick. Forrest Staley's defense played a lot of a reserve role as a safety and a lot of special teams, sort of the thing they're expecting Jonas Sanker to do for him this year. He showed up in training camp, and he was actually backing up Alontae Taylor at the store initially until he got hurt. And he was kind of back and forth about getting some practice and then not practicing, not really sure. But, he really wasn't much of a factor in preseason. So when he didn't make the initial 53, it wasn't that surprising. There's a possibility he's healthy now and ready to come back for the 53. And they're looking at, well, he's going to handle some of the special teams duties. And we have a guy who was going to be the number 2 star until his injury, and Ugo Amadi stepped up and showed he could do it and usurped it. But you still have a guy back up that spot, help out at safety, be a core special teamer. Because when I went back and looked hard at Burgess's career, when he was a rookie, he was getting a lot of playing time till week 7. So when he broke his ankle, he was IR, done for the year. So he was on the Super Bowl winning team, didn't play the rest of the year after that injury. Staley leaves, and it looks like I'm guessing because all of a sudden his snaps at safety dwindled down, and it's just probably new staff, new scheme, player caught in a wash, not really working out. He ends up being released 2022, spent some time with the Giants, and then the Commanders. 2023, he was with the Commanders. 24, wound up with the Bills, hurt in preseason. They put him on IR in August of last year, just as the preseason training camp was wrapping up, and then he was released shortly thereafter. Saints picked him up this offseason, and he's been here since. But in 21 and 23, he was 21, he was still a core special teamer for the Rams, even though he really wasn't playing much in their defensive scheme for a bit. And in 2023, when the Commanders had him, he was a core special teamer for them. Not a lot of snaps on defense. So over that, from 2020 until 2023, because he didn't play it down last year, it's 861 special team snaps. So there is a lot of special team experience there on him. And, like I said, this was Ross Jackson reminding me of this and putting this back, that he may be healthy. And the plan may have been all along, he was going to assume JT's Gray spot on special teams while still giving us somebody we know can play some safety or plug into that star position if we need that. And he may have been healthy enough for them to be thinking he can play coming up this Sunday. That provided the kind of need for that roster shakeup, and JT Gray not having that 53 spot. Kind of speculation on Ross. He wasn't breaking news. He was saying, this is what I think may be happening, and we'll see. And I have to agree with him. It's like it makes sense if that's kind of the way it worked out. And obviously, as people start practicing, we get the practice reports this week, because now that we're in week 1, they're required by the NFL, kind of roll in to see who's healthy and who's not. This may make more sense. But, for the most part right now, it was a bit of a head scratching move, especially in the amount of time it took for the cut to happen a week after the 53, which is, like I said, I was a little nervous he may not make it, but once he made it, I just put it to bed going, no, he's locked in and they're going to keep him. And nope, as of yesterday, that situation has changed. Three additions to the practice squad also happened yesterday. First one's we added a defensive interior player, Keziah Izzard, 6'3", 305 pounds, undrafted free agent out of Penn State to Kansas City. Stayed on their roster all through training camp, didn't make it through in the final 53. At Penn State, he was known as a disruptive player on the defensive line and very solid against the run. And Penn State was very, very good at stopping the run last year in college. I also have to mention in that draft class last year, or back in April, when it came to defensive interior players, you had the studs up top, and there was a handful of those, and another double handful of really, really good players, and then quite a few. And I'm imagining this where Izzard fell into a lot of players who were really good at maybe stopping the run, but they were questioning the pass rush or vice versa. Kind of thinking he fell into that, and because there were so many of them, some of them just drifted down in being undrafted free agents. And on a normal year, when you don't have a class that deep, honestly, somebody like Izzard probably is going to be a day three pick, a lot like Boyd was for us last year. Doesn't help him that he goes to Kansas City. He has a very good and very deep defensive line, but while he's there, he manages to get 61 total preseason snaps in 3 games. 32 were against the run, 29 against the pass. He graded out PFF over those snaps, 70.1 against the run, 66.2 against the pass. Not that bad, 70.7 overall. He had 5 tackles, missed one pressure. But the one that I found interesting, of his 5 tackles, 4 of them were stops, which PFF calls a stop a tackle that constitutes a failure for the offense. Now, they don't define what failure is, but I think we can probably just surmise in there. Basically, a guy that's blown a play up and ends up making a tackle. Kind of what you want your defensive interior guys to do. And I think he makes a lot of sense. Going back to they may have had him on the radar as an undrafted free agent and he signed with Kansas City instead, or they picked up on him or whatever, but some type of basis of, okay, we need to add some kind of big run stoppers in the middle. He's available. They grab him, which is key because you got Gottschalk. You're expecting a lot from him, but 32 years old, lot of tread in the league. You may not get 17 games out of him. Boyd has made a big step this preseason forward to back him up. But still, let's keep adding some depth there. In the practice squad, the only kind of interior guy we had was Jonah Williams, I believe. More of a 3 tech, not necessarily a guy that's going to line up over the nose. Some of our other, probably Shepard and Broughton, could probably do it, but I think this is more of a still trying to find more of just a dedicated zero tech, nose over the center type player to back up Gottschalk and Boyd. So he's getting his first chance to prove it on the practice squad. Also signed an edge player. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any of these names, but I think it's defensive edge Aku Leota or Leda. 6'3", 250 pounds, undrafted free agent out of Auburn. Carolina grabbed him in 2023. Played a total of 8 games with Carolina, and he had 77 snaps as an edge rusher, 90 on special teams. In 2024, last year, he played weeks 1 and 2 against Carolina, and of course, week 1 was when we had them in a dome. He ends up leaving that game with 3 tackles and a sack, but was released after week 2. Pittsburgh grabbed him, kind of spent time on their practice squad to finish out 24. They brought him back in 25, so he made it all the way through camp and was cut, final roster spot. In his 3 preseason games with Pittsburgh, because he had no games in 24 after that second one with Carolina, 87 total snaps. PFF or 26 run. PFF graded him out 73.6 against the run. 56 in pass rush. They graded him out 61.0. He had 5 in coverage and 35.4. But overall, 63.2 grade. Not bad. And again, this is another case of a team grabs a guy from the edge with, kind of feel like the same thing with Izzard. This guy probably didn't have much of a chance of making a team in Pittsburgh. When you look at their edge players, TJ Watt, one of the best in the league, Alex Highsmith, one of the best compliments to a top end guy in the league, backed up by Nick Herbig, who pretty good himself, and they drafted Jack Sawyer this year out of Ohio State. That's just the top four, not counting anybody else they may have running around. So I think it's just another one of those getting squeezed out a little bit, but probably showed enough in those snaps in preseason, being a little aware of him. He played against us last year and got a sack in that game, and just adding to, because right now you just kind of have Diggs on that practice squad backing up the top the four players on the roster, just bringing in some depth of a guy, seems to be a speed edge kind of player with a little ability to play the run. Let's see how it works out. The last one is the most interesting one. Tommy, I think it's Malott. He's drafted in the 6th round by the Raiders. He was a quarterback in college, and they moved him to wide receiver, where he hung out until cut down day last week in the final 53. He's cut. 6 foot, 200 pounds. Now, Dana Brugler, in a tweet, and this has got retweeted around by a lot of the Saints people, his pro day numbers, which were a 4.3940 with splits at 20 and 10 at 2.56 and 1.50. 41-inch vertical jump, 10 foot 4 inches on a broad jump. Basically, all that equates to he's very fast, very quick, kind of explosive. And at 6 foot 200 pounds, some pretty decent size. With the Raiders, they gave him 24 snaps in the slot at slot receiver, 6 in kick coverage, 4 in returns, 3 in punt coverage, 6 in returns. Overall grade, I mean, a lot more limited than some of the other players, but PFF had him at a 54.4 as a receiver and a 63.0 in special teams. So he's really an athletic guy with decent size. Kind of one of those things where sometimes you bring guys like that and maybe you get a chance to figure out what they're going to do later. So practice squad makes sense for somebody like that. Now, with the having played quarterback in college, the Raiders trying him at receiver, plus basically returning and covering both punts and kicks, I did see some people throw out the name Taysom Hill. All I have to say is hold on, Tigers. Okay. That let's not be heaping that expectations. But I do acknowledge the fact that something like this, in a weird sort of way, kind of mirrors what we talked about in the last video about Taysom Hill just kind of popping on some video that Sean Payton is watching about another player with some of the scouting people, and they cut more video on Taysom Hill instead of Austin Carr and go, yeah, we need to get that guy in here. So it's not a realm of possibility something along that line happened, and that they may use him in a similar fashion where he can do some things on special teams and maybe get involved in the offense, try to get the ball in his hands with that speed. He's not going to have the power with those, I don't think, with that size like Taysom does. But overall, yeah, I can kind of see where you might be able to draw comparisons. And hey, in a perfect world, he is that diamond in the rough unicorn that we found once in Taysom, and suddenly we find another one in Tommy Malott. So that's it for today. Just roster cleanup. JT Gray, obviously the big story here, and we'll see how that plays out and how it's going to affect the Saints going forward. And I'm probably going to be the first one bitching if we give up a long punt return or kick return for a touchdown. I'll be perfectly honest with you, but I can see potentially why it had to happen in the way it happened. Um, I just hope it doesn't come back and bite us on the ass, because it very well could. So as far as the rest of the week, we're going to have a show pretty much going into week one the best I can against the Cardinals. But look, we just don't have a lot of information. In week one in the NFL is like that, and kind of week two is too. It's about the time week three is everybody starts figuring everything out, and teams that held stuff back in the preseason, it's been shown in those first couple of games. And after you get about 8 quarters of football, that starts the whole, I think, adjustment process. And I think we kind of proved this last year. You're not going to catch anybody off guard anymore. Now you got to go out and play the game and play it at a high level. And if you don't, 2-0 becomes a 5-win season like that. So hopefully we avoid all that. Do the best to break it down and set up what I think is going to happen on Sunday, and probably have a confidence value on those. And they are going to mostly be guesses of somewhere slightly above zero, but maybe some information comes out. We can kind of figure some stuff out. Saints, who practices, who doesn't, and ultimately what that final 53 man is going to look like could tell us a lot too. So, first time here, you like Michelle, please like, share, subscribe. Almost to 980, almost two away. So if I can get two more subscribers today, I will call this Tuesday a major success. And anything more than that is as we say down here, lanyap. But I thank everybody for the support and the help in growing this channel. So till I see you at the end of the week, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.